My husband left me because I wasn't successful enough. Without knowing, I made $500,000. Then he fell silent. My name is Emily. I'm 42 years old, an illustrator living in a cozy neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland. My small cottage sits on a quiet street, with a garden full of hydrangeas and lilies, where I often spend hours sketching new ideas for children's books, while sipping chamomile tea. I thought I had a peaceful life until one fateful afternoon when everything changed. That afternoon was supposed to be ordinary. My husband of 14 years, Derek, had just returned from his business trip. I was eager to see him, but when he walked through the door, he wasn't alone. The moment I opened it, Derek stood there with a stony expression and a thick folder in his hand. Behind him, a woman I didn't recognize hovered in the doorway. He placed the folder on the table and said, in a cold, calculated voice, "These are divorce papers. Sign them, and starting next month, I expect $10,000 a month from you. You're not really doing anything anyway." I froze, staring at him, trying to make sense of the words that felt like they came from a stranger's mouth. But what struck me more than anything was the woman behind him, Chloe, my best friend from college, the one who had been there for every milestone of my life, the one I had trusted with my deepest secrets. Now, she stood next to my husband, smiling smugly, as if she'd always belonged there. 100 questions surged through my mind, but only one came out. A divorce? Fine. Derek seemed taken aback by my calm response. He raised his eyebrows, clearly expecting a scene, but I knew better. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Without another word, I picked up the folder, turned on my heel, and walked into my studio. I could hear Chloe's voice behind me, saying to Derek, "See, she's too weak to fight back. This is nothing for her." I shut the door, and the words I had been holding back started to surface. Fury. Not at them, but at myself for not seeing it sooner. I had allowed my marriage to become a one-way street. Derek, the man I had supported for years, had always belittled my work. "You're lucky to have me," he would say. "You sit at home drawing pictures and writing for kids. It's cute, but it's not a real job." I believed him. I did. I let myself shrink while he built his career, never realizing how suffocating the relationship had become. But that was over now. I stood in front of the mirror in my studio, staring into my own eyes. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who had been fragile and uncertain. This woman was someone who had finally seen the truth, cold, determined, and ready to take back control. That night, I contacted my lawyer, who had helped me protect my work for years. I instructed him to go over everything I owned: assets, copyrights, contracts. The royalties from my books had been quietly building up, and Derek had no idea how much I'd been making on my own. They had both underestimated me, and now, that would be their downfall. I met Chloe when I was 16, back in high school in Seattle. She had a way about her, always the center of attention, always surrounded by admirers. We were lab partners in biology, and I thought she was fun, spontaneous, and charming. But there was always an edge to her behavior. She would flirt with anyone's boyfriend and then play innocent. She'd say, "They came onto me, not the other way around." And for some reason, I always bought it. We stayed friends though, despite the red flags. Maybe because I thought I was different. She knew how to make people feel special, and I convinced myself she would never do that to me. She knew all about Logan, the boy I'd had a crush on since high school. And when he eventually asked me out, Chloe smiled and said, "I'm happy for you." I thought she meant it too. I didn't know at the time that this would be the beginning of a very different kind of truth. After college, Chloe moved to Chicago to be with her fiancé, Matt, an architect at a big design firm. Derek and I stayed in touch with her and Matt, visiting them occasionally, but things started to change. Derek grew distant, especially when Chloe was around. But I didn't notice how much until it was too late. The first time I met him, I thought, maybe Chloe finally found someone real. Matt wasn't like the arrogant guys she usually dated. He was grounded, patient, the kind of man who paid attention without making it feel like a performance. When she spoke, he actually listened. He'd pass her the bread at dinner without being asked, adjust her scarf when it slipped, and glance at her like she was the only one in the room. For the first time, I let myself believe Chloe had found something lasting. They got married the following fall in a little hillside vineyard just outside Bend, Oregon. Derek and I were both there. I hand-lettered their wedding signage and designed the menus. Chloe pulled me aside before the ceremony, hugged me tight, and said, "If I ever had to bet my life on anyone, it'd be you and Matt." But Chloe never really understood loyalty can coexist with envy. 3 years into her marriage, she started calling more often. At first, it was to vent about creative block, about deadlines at her boutique PR firm. Then, her tone shifted. She said Matt had become dull, that he didn't surprise her anymore, that he wasn't present. I told her to speak to him directly, to be honest, to work on it. But now I think she wasn't looking to repair anything. She was setting the stage to escape into someone else's life. Around that same time, Derek began acting oddly, leaving in the middle of the day with vague reasons, laughing at texts, always tilting his phone away when I entered the room. Once, I walked in just as he glanced at a message on his lock screen. "I miss you too." My stomach dropped. I didn't ask not then. I couldn't. Some part of me already knew. Then came the day he brought Chloe into our house, stood in the kitchen doorway with a manila envelope in hand, and said it all without shame. That's when the pieces finally came together. It hadn't started that day, it had started long before, and I'd been the only one refusing to see it. 6 years ago, I still remember Chloe glowing in her oversized cardigan, holding her stomach with both hands, as she walked into the cafe, where we were supposed to meet for brunch. She was 12 weeks pregnant and nearly vibrating with excitement. "Emily," she whispered, "I'm pregnant. Finally, something that's just mine." I didn't really get it at the time. I thought she meant independence, a new chapter. It was Derek who offered to drive her to her doctor appointments said. Matt was swamped with client presentations. I thought it was odd, but I smiled and nodded. We were all friends. That's what friends did, right? But over time, Derek became unusually invested. He'd buy her prenatal vitamins without being asked. He scheduled her ultrasounds in his phone. I found out only when I flipped open his planner one day, looking for a receipt, and saw a scribbled note. "Week 18 skip sushi." I asked him what it was about, and he just shrugged. "Just making sure Chloe's okay. Matt's barely ever around. Somebody has to be there." I didn't argue, not out loud, but something cracked quietly inside me that day. Soon, he was gone more nights than he was home, always with some excuse. "Chloe's having back pain. Her doctor wanted someone there." He even started skipping client calls to attend her birthing classes. I gently reminded him that Matt should be going with her. "It's their baby, not yours," I said once, hoping he'd hear himself. But now I know he never did. But then Derek snapped something he almost never did. "You're so selfish, Emily," he barked. "Chloe has no one. All you do is sit in your studio sketching. You have no idea what it's like to be alone during pregnancy." I bit my lip and stayed silent. Not because he was right. He wasn't. But because I knew if I said one more word, I'd shatter. When Chloe gave birth, it was Derek pacing outside the delivery room, not Matt. I only found out because a nurse asked me, with a warm but puzzled expression, "You're Mr. Derek's wife, right?" "Oh. He's been such a rock for Miss Chloe, so attentive." I nodded quickly and turned away, hiding the tremble in my breath. After the baby came a little girl named Sophie, things only got worse. Derek was barely home. His quick errands turned into nights away. He was at Chloe's house so often that her neighbors started calling him Sophie's father. At first, I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that it would blow over, that things would come back to us. But the third time Sophie called him daddy in front of me, at a quiet Sunday brunch Chloe hosted, something in me snapped. I poured myself a glass of orange juice, avoided eye contact, and stepped out onto the patio, trying to breathe through the sting. Derek followed. "Are you imagining things again?" he asked, his voice half mocking, half weary. I turned to face him, really face him for the first time in months. "What are you doing, Derek?" I asked, my voice low but clear. "You treat Sophie like she's yours. You're always over there like Chloe's the only one who matters. What about me? What am I to you?" He gave a quiet, almost amused laugh, like I'd said something ridiculous. "Emily, you don't get it. Chloe needs me. Matt's too disconnected to show up for her the way I can. I'm just doing what's right. And you, "You don't need me. You never did." That line hit harder than anything he'd ever said. "You don't need me." It wasn't a compliment, it was an accusation. Yes, I'm independent. I've built a world out of ink and paper, color and story. I know how to survive, but that doesn't mean I want to be replaced. Not by the woman I once called my sister. From that day, something cold settled between Derek and me. He still floated between our house and Chloe's, still masked it as helping, but we both knew the truth. Whatever they had, it wasn't about friendship anymore. Then one afternoon, while I was in the back studio working on a new story layout, the doorbell rang. It was a steady knock, calm but deliberate, like the person on the other side already knew what this moment was for. When I opened the door, I saw Matt. His eyes looked older, more worn than I remembered, shadowed with sleeplessness. He was dressed neatly, as always, but he held a thick brown leather folder in his hands, like it weighed more than paper should. "No greetings, no warm-up. I think it's time we talk," he said. I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. I made a pot of coffee without asking, then sat across from him at the kitchen table. He placed a folder between us and slid it toward me. And in that quiet exchange, I knew everything was about to change. "I hired a private investigator 3 months ago," Matt said, his voice slow and deliberate. "At first, I thought Chloe was just keeping something from me. I didn't expect it to be Derek." I didn't open the folder right away. My chest was heavy, like something dense and cold was sitting on it. But I kept my face steady, hands still, like I could hold myself together with enough effort. Matt went on, "They've been meeting at a hotel 5 miles from here, 3 times a week. There's video footage, receipts, even security cam shots of them leaving together early in the morning." Something inside me went very still. No more second guessing. No more hoping I was just being paranoid. No more excuses to protect the story I'd clung to for too long. "Why tell me this?" I asked, after the silence stretched too long. He looked at me, his voice quieter now. "Because you're not Chloe. You have dignity, and I don't want Sophie growing up around this lie." He sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "I've thought about divorce, but Sophie, she's still so little. I don't want her to grow up in chaos." I nodded. I understood that kind of silence too well. It's why I hadn't said anything when Derek started staying out late, or when he laughed at texts he wouldn't let me see. Because Sophie wasn't mine, but I'd loved her like she was from the first time I held her. "I'm not planning to forgive them," I said, my voice even. "But I'm not ready to tear everything apart yet either. Not while Sophie's still this young." Matt nodded once, and in that small movement, we became something else, no longer just the betrayed spouses. We were co-conspirators in restraint, survivors with a plan. We waited for Sophie to be old enough to understand without shattering. Waited for the right moment. But that didn't mean we did nothing. I started collecting every shred of truth: emails, texts, credit card charges that didn't add up, Derek's schedule, his alibis. Matt did the same for Chloe. We met regularly under the guise of coordinating art lessons or weekend playdates. No one looked twice. We were just 2 adults raising a child. But every glance, every polite smile between us carried weight. Because we knew. Meanwhile, Chloe and Derek played their parts well. Still laughing with Sophie in public. Still acting like this was some harmless chapter in a feel-good story. But I knew the climax would come. And when it did, I'd be the one with the truth in my hands. I wasn't the woman who once believed a 15-year friendship was unshakable. I wasn't the wife who waited at the kitchen window, pretending the perfume on his collar belonged to a stranger. I was Emily, now 42 years old, quiet but unbreakable, reclaiming everything that had been taken from me. Matt and I became something steady in the middle of it all. Once, as Sophie dozed off on the couch, crayon still in her hand, Matt looked at me and said softly, "I really thought Chloe was my forever." I gave a tired smile. So did I. No more words. Just a silence of people who had learned patience the hard way. And a shared promise one day, the truth would come out. Not with shouting, but with calm, unshakable certainty. Then came the checkup. Routine, I thought. The doctor frowned at the ultrasound, then looked at me with those carefully gentle eyes. "There are some unusual findings. We'll need to run more tests." A week later, the results: a large benign ovarian tumor. Not cancerous, but complex. I'd need surgery, monitoring, hormone therapy, a long recovery. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat in the sterile light of the hospital hallway, holding the folder like it might vanish if I let go. I called Derek, not because I needed him, but because I wanted to see if there was anything left of the man I used to love. He answered on the sixth ring, voice flat. Yeah. What's up? I paused. I'm being admitted for surgery. Some health issues. There was a long silence. I'm busy with work, he finally said. But maybe I'll swing by if I get the time. That was it. No, what's wrong? No, which hospital? No, are you okay? Just silence dressed as indifference. And that's when I knew whatever hope I'd been holding on to, it was already gone. I heard Chloe's laugh somewhere in the background just before Derek hung up. I stared at the screen for a moment, then quietly set my phone aside. 3 days later, I was lying in a hospital bed in a quiet room on the second floor, N4 in my arm and my sketchpad balanced gently on my lap. I was still drafting a new story, something soft and whimsical, with woodland animals and hidden doors. Not because I had deadlines, not for money, but because sketching new ideas for children's books was the only thing that still reminded me of who I was. Sophie, once the little girl I swaddled in her favorite purple blanket, taught how to draw clouds, and sang to sleep, was slipping away from me. After her 15th birthday, her texts became shorter. Busy with school, she'd say, or sometimes she didn't reply at all. I knew what Chloe was doing. She didn't need to say much. A subtle shift in tone here, a conveniently vague remark there. Chloe had always been good at building walls with kindness, especially when it came to guiding the emotions of a child. Matt still came by every Sunday like clockwork. Sometimes he brought fresh flowers from a local shop. Other times, a box of cardamom pastries from that tiny bakery on Fremont I loved. He'd sit beside me, his presence warm but quiet, talking about work, or a lease, or a memory we shared before everything broke. I couldn't tell you the exact moment it started, but eventually, Matt's visits became something more than routine. His steadiness, his calm, his thoughtfulness, they became part of my healing. A soft, grounding rhythm in a world that had turned brittle and sharp. Then one afternoon, Derek showed up without warning. He wore a rumpled white shirt and jeans he hadn't bothered to iron, carrying a small paper bag filled with peaches, the one fruit I've been allergic to since college. Just stopping by real quick, he said, stepping halfway into the room. Chloe's waiting in the car. I nodded once, not speaking. He looked around, his eyes scanning the sterile walls before landing on the half-colored sketch lying open on my lap. A fox under a moonlit sky, a scene from a new manuscript I hadn't yet named. You're still doing this stuff? He asked, smirking. With your condition, maybe it's time to take a break. I didn't answer. I simply turned the page and kept coloring. He stood awkwardly, clearly expecting something more. A thank you, maybe. A question. Some sign that I still needed him. After a long silence, he muttered, "Heard you landed a big deal." I finally looked up, meeting his eyes. Not with hope, not with resentment, just quiet curiosity. But it wasn't concern I saw in his face. It was calculation. Yeah. A studio wants to adapt Luna and the Hill of Light into an animated series, I said, my voice calm as I smoothed the edge of the contract on my lap. Signed it last week. Derek stood by the door, arms crossed, then let out a dry cough. Wow, you're really something, huh? So good you don't need anyone. I smiled, small and sure. That's right. I don't need anyone, especially not someone who was never really there. He didn't reply, just turned and walked out, leaving behind nothing but the hollow shell of a man I once called a husband. I picked up my colored pencil again and turned back to my sketchbook. I drew an open door leading to a sky untouched by betrayal, unspoiled by laughter that cut too deep, and far away from people who only ever stepped into my life to walk out like they never meant to stay. I had stepped out of my hospital room for some quick tests, 15 minutes at most. When I returned, my phone lit up with 18 missed calls, all from Derek. Curious, but too tired for drama, I called him back. He answered on the first ring, shouting, "Emily, what the hell is going on?" I blinked slow. What are you talking about? There's a foreclosure sign in front of the house. Chloe and I were told we've got 3 days to get out. That's our home. I paused, then gave a soft laugh. No, Derek, That house is mine. It's been in my name since before we ever got married. I paid the down payment. I paid the mortgage. I paid the property taxes every year. You didn't put in a single cent. I'm your husband," he snapped. "The least you could have done is talk to me first." I eased back into the bed, shifting my fur-line gently. "We're separated. The divorce is already in motion. And honestly, the moment you brought Chloe into our home like it was normal, that's when I stopped considering you a voice that mattered." There was a loud crash on his end. Then Chloe's voice, sharp and panicked. "She can't do this. We're a family." I tapped speakerphone. "A family?" I said, voice calm but firm. "A family without truth is just a well-dressed illusion. I'm just giving you both a reality check." Derek's voice dropped, trying to sound composed. "Fine, but you still owe me at least $9 grand. You said you'd help support me." I actually laughed then. "I never said that. And if you dig up the prenup you signed, maybe check clause 12, property acquired before. Marriage isn't subject to division or support. It's mine, legally and entirely." There was a long silence, then a shift in his tone, softer, more desperate. "Emily, we were a real family once. I messed up, but now that you're finally successful, do you really have to be this cruel?" I leaned my head back against the stiff hospital pillow, eyes on the white ceiling above. Not because I was moved, but because I'd heard that same carefully worded guilt trip too many times before. "I'm not being cruel, Derek. I'm just done being vulnerable." My voice was steady. "My attorney will be in touch from now on." Then I ended the call. The next morning, Chloe sent a long, rambling message filled with guilt-tinged nostalgia, passive aggression wrapped in regret, and a final line that read, "You were my best friend. I never thought you'd take things this far." I didn't reply, but her words echoed in my mind. Take things this far. And all I could think was, who really did? Helen Rohr, my lawyer, sharp-witted and no-nonsense, with salt and pepper hair and a gaze that could shatter egos, handled everything. She sent Derek and Chloe a formal notice with every necessary document attached, the title deed, the financial records, the untouched balance sheets, showing exactly who had built and paid for that house. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology. I just wanted them to understand something simple. I was no longer the woman who brewed tea while Chloe gossiped on my kitchen stool, or who adjusted Derek's tie before his meetings. I was the woman who decided who could enter my space, and who no longer deserved the key. A few days later, Matt visited with a small brown bag of warm walnut scones, my favorite. He sat beside me as I rested, showing me photos of Sophie's science fair project on his phone, her proud smile, her little hand holding up a ribbon. Then he looked at me, eyes gentle, and asked, "Are you okay?" I smiled, soft but real. "I just closed the door, but I don't feel empty," I added, glancing out the window. "I feel relieved." Matt didn't say anything right away. He just rested his hand lightly over mine. "Maybe it's time to build a new door," he said after a moment. "But this one for you." It was a quiet March afternoon, nearly 2 months after my first treatment cycle, when my doctor gave me the go-ahead to leave the hospital for a few days. Matt picked me up and drove me to the small apartment I'd rented, tucked in a quiet part of the outskirts, with windows that opened to a backyard filled with orange trees, a place that felt like a beginning. Less than 3 days later, I got an unexpected call from Marjorie, Derek's mother. Her voice wavered. "Emily, could you come to the house? Things are falling apart." I paused. I'd cut ties with Derek and Chloe for my own sanity. But Marjorie and her husband, Henry, had always treated me with kindness. Even when others didn't, they never once turned their backs on me. Not during the separation. Not even through treatment. I nodded to myself and texted Matt, "I need to step out. Something's happening at Derek's place." When I pulled up to the familiar, hydrangea-lined walkway of the house I'd once made a home, it was anything but peaceful. Inside, Derek and Chloe were mid-argument in the living room, voices raised and sharp. Elise sat off to the side, curled up in the armchair, phone in hand, her eyes rimmed red. Marjorie saw me enter and rushed over, gripping my hand. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "She wanted to see you, but there's more going on than that." I stepped into the room, unsure what to expect. Before I could speak, Elise stood. Her posture had changed, taller, more grounded. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She looked at me with a gaze full of quiet fire. Emily, she said my name, not Mom, not a nickname. It was the first time she'd addressed me in months. Elise, I said softly. She took a breath, then turned toward Chloe. I need to say something. I've stayed quiet long enough. Chloe frowned and stepped forward. Elise, don't do this now. Family issues don't need an audience. You're not my family, Elise said, voice steady, words slicing clean through the room. Chloe blanched. Derek's jaw dropped slightly, like he couldn't process what she was saying. Elise kept going, her tone slow and measured, like she'd practiced each word in front of a mirror. The person I think of as my mom, she said, glancing at me, is the one who sat beside me through my first panic attack. The one who let me help her sketch ideas for her book when I was 10. The one who taught me that love means staying, even when it's hard. She turned to face me fully, tears trailing her cheeks, though her voice didn't tremble. That person is you. It's always been you, Emily. I hadn't even realized I was crying until I felt the warmth slip past my jawline. But it wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was healing. Chloe's voice was a whisper. Elise, I gave birth to you, but you didn't raise me. Elise shot back. Her voice cracked now. You treated me like a trophy, something to prove you'd won. Henry stood up from the corner. He rested a hand on Elise's shoulder and turned to Derek. Do you even understand what you've lost? It's not Emily. It's trust. It's the one thing your daughter still knew how to give until now. The room fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock above the mantel. I finally stepped forward, voice low. Elise, I've known for years that you were Derek's biological daughter. Eyes widened around the room. I overheard a conversation once between Chloe and her OB. I confirmed it quietly, but I chose not to say anything. Not because I was afraid, but because you didn't need truth. You needed safety. You needed to grow up in peace. I looked at Derek, the anger long gone. What remained was pure, hollow disappointment. You've taken a lot from me, but the one thing you can't take is the love I have for her. Elise crossed the room and threw her arms around me. I'm sorry, she whispered, for trusting the wrong people for too long, but I'm not letting you go again. In that moment, I knew no matter what else had been taken from me, I had something no court could assign and no document could certify. A child who chose me not because of DNA, but because I'd shown up. And that meant more than any title ever could. The chaos had finally settled. Elise and I were getting ready to leave when a new voice cut through the quiet. Sorry I'm late, it said from the doorway. Figured I should show up to complete the cast. Everyone turned. Matt stepped into the room, calm, collected, and cool as ever, but his gaze was sharp as winter glass. He looked straight at Chloe, and his voice was clear and even. Chloe, you never officially signed the divorce papers. Chloe blinked, stunned. What? Matt stepped closer. The paperwork you sent 8 months ago? Just a draft. No lawyer's signature. No notarization. Never submitted to the court. A subtle, knowing smirk tugged at his mouth. So, technically, he said, you're still legally my wife. Derek let out a snorting laugh, one that held no humor. Oh, come on, Matt. A man your age still clinging to his ex. Wake up. Matt's eyes didn't leave Chloe's. Oh, I'm very much awake, he said. Are you? I'm the one she chose. Matt didn't flinch. Calmly, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and held the screen up for everyone to see. I'm not clinging to anyone, he said smoothly, but I think it's important everyone knows where things actually stand. Especially since this woman, he glanced directly at Chloe, has been pawning off our wedding gifts to fund investment schemes with her new boyfriend. Chloe's face drained of color. Derek shifted awkwardly, glancing around the room like he wanted to disappear. All right, that's enough, he said. This little theater show isn't fooling anyone. You two think some dramatic speech is going to change anything? He scoffed and turned to me. I know Emily's not some big shot. She's just a lucky illustrator who happened to get a few breaks. No way she's actually got the power to flip the script. I smiled, not wide, just a small, quiet smile. The kind you earn. Actually, Derek luck might account for about 5% of my success. The rest? I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. That's from discipline, early mornings, and years of silence while you didn't notice. I opened my banking app and turned the screen for the room to see. 3 of the country's biggest publishing houses listed as recent deposit sources. Regular transfers. Clean records. My current account balance? $376,000. And that was just the main one. My voice stayed even. I have 3 active publishing contracts, an animated adaptation launching this fall, and 4 children's book series that have stayed on the bestseller list for over a year. I glanced around. Last year's income? Just under $500,000. Derek's jaw went slack. Chloe stumbled a step back, her lips parting, but no words came out. I kept going, while you were sneaking around behind my back, laughing at me and writing me off. I was building something, not just a career, a whole life. A life that doesn't revolve around pity and doesn't need liars in it. The silence in the room was complete. You could hear the old wall clock ticking behind us, like it was marking the final seconds of an era. Then Chloe spoke. Her voice was oddly soft. Emily, I know there were a lot of misunderstandings between us, but maybe, if you're open to it, we could start over. I looked her straight in the eye. Not with anger, not with scorn, just peace. The kind that comes after you stop waiting for someone to change. Chloe, I said gently, the only thing I ever asked for was honesty. And you couldn't give me that. A friendship that's been sold out for ego and status can't be put back on like an old sweater. There's nothing left to restart. Derek just stood there, blinking like he still couldn't process it. He opened his mouth to speak, but I'd already turned, reaching for Elise's hand. I don't need apologies, I said, loud enough for the room to hear. I just need people to understand that from now on, my life has no room for liars. Then we left. Me, with my head held high. Elise, with her fingers tightly laced in mine. Behind us, 2 people who once thought I'd always be the loser in their story. They were wrong. And this time, I didn't need to say a single word more to prove it. A few weeks later, the fallout was everywhere. Word spread quickly through our little pocket of Portland. Derek had been fired by his father, Henry, from the real estate development project he was supposed to oversee. The same project he used to brag about at dinner parties. The scandal had cracked everything wide open. People talked, quietly but consistently. And this time, Henry didn't clean up the mess for him. At the next family gathering, I happened to be there, invited by Marjorie, who had grown even warmer toward me since that night. Henry stood across from Derek, gaze steady. From now on, he said, voice firm, you'll earn your living. No favors, no shortcuts. If you ever want to earn back anyone's trust, start from the bottom. And with that, he walked away. I didn't say anything, didn't need to, because I already had everything I needed. Peace, purpose, and a child who had chosen me not because she had to, but because I'd shown her she mattered. Days later, Derek was sent to Oregon's rugged western coast, where he took on manual labor aboard a deep-sea fishing vessel. Wake-up calls came at 4 o'clock a.m., and sleep meant swaying in rusted iron bunks that smelled of salt and diesel. He called me once. I didn't answer. As for Chloe, her fall was just as harsh. With her credibility in shambles and her risky investments tanked, she ended up in a run-down motel on the south edge of Portland. Days were spent slinging coffee and burgers at a roadside diner. Evenings, she ran app-based delivery shifts, and weekends were swallowed up by hours in a freezing warehouse. Once a woman who curated her life in gloss and gold, Chloe had become someone who barely made eye contact, blending into the corners of the world she once strutted through. She lost custody of Elise not long after that unforgettable evening. The court moved quickly, fueled by documentation Matt's attorney submitted, along with Elise's own calm but unwavering testimony. Matt was granted full legal guardianship. Chloe's visitation rights were revoked, pending direct approval from the guardian, something Elise showed no interest in allowing. I saw Elise again on a breezy May afternoon at the central branch of the Portland Library. She was tucked into a quiet corner, completely absorbed in a French edition of one of the children's books I had illustrated, just released in Europe. Why French? I asked, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. She looked up, her face radiant. Because I want to translate your books someday. Mom, I want kids everywhere to read your stories. Even if I'm living across the world, I want them to feel what I feel when I read your words. My heart swelled in a way I hadn't expected. I used to dream of a small, quiet life. Just painting, just peace. But Elise helped me see that what I create doesn't have to stay in a quiet corner. It can touch hearts far beyond my own. My health was improving too. Treatments were less frequent now. And the doctor said if the numbers stayed stable for a few more months, I could be fully discharged, needing only occasional checkups. I returned to my brushes and sketch pads, to the vibrant, forgiving world of watercolors and children's wonder, a place where pain didn't exist, or if it did, it could be painted over with hope. One golden-hued evening, as I was in my home studio surrounded by palettes and soft music, Matt walked in, composed as always, but this time he held a simple bouquet of lavender. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady, "if life hands you a second chance, I don't want to waste mine. Emily, would you ever want to start over? This time with someone who stays?" I paused. We had both walked through the storm. He had seen me at my lowest and never once tried to fix me, only stood beside me, quietly steady. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took the lavender, placed it gently in a vase, and turned back to him. "Would you wait for me?" I asked. He nodded. "As long as it takes." And I believed him, not because he said the right thing, but because in a world that had knocked me down more times than I could count, Matt had been the only one who simply stayed. Emily's journey proves that sometimes life's deepest betrayals are the very things that set us free. After being abandoned by both her husband and her best friend, she didn't shatter. She rebuilt, quietly, fiercely. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. Her resilience, creativity, and quiet strength not only led her to healing, but inspired the next generation. In a world full of fractures, Emily chose to live honestly. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful kind of victory. What do you think of Emily's transformation and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow for more heartfelt, raw, and empowering stories about life, love, and rediscovery.